Charles Cornishdale, otherwise known as Raw Egg Nationalist. Welcome to Thinking Class. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. It really is. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Well, me too. It's been a long time in the making, and I'm glad we finally got our diaries together. And Charlie, you've amassed almost 300,000 Twitter followers at the time of writing, almost 20,000 on Substack. And you state that it is your sworn mission to help people break the chains of ill health and dependency because the future of the nation depends on you. And this philosophy guides much of what you produce. And actually, since your name came out into the open by way of Hope Not Hate recently, if anyone was to search your name, you can find that you were 7 years ago giving speeches on the Reformation in Exeter Cathedral on its 500th year anniversary, as well as in conversation with people about the ethics of care. So how did you come to hold this view and end up on this sworn mission, and why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, I've been on a very strange journey for some time. So, I spent the better part of maybe almost a decade in academia. I did my undergraduate degree at Exeter in the southwest. I did history. Then I went to Cambridge and I did social anthropology. Then I went to Oxford after a brief hiatus and did medieval history. Read for a PhD or DPhil in medieval history. I wrote about the Reformation. But it kind of became clear to me actually when I was doing the DPhil, although I really enjoyed it, I enjoyed doing the research and it was, one of the great things actually about doing a PhD is that, especially in the humanities or the social sciences, is that you actually get a lot of time to yourself. I didn't have much contact time. I didn't have to go to lectures if I didn't want to, didn't have to go to seminars. I was well organized and motivated, so I was doing the research and it was all fine. So I had a lot of time just to read. So I was just reading a lot and, reading things that I wanted to read that weren't necessarily anything to do with the project that I was doing. But it became very clear to me actually that I didn't want to be an academic. So I made a few kind of half-hearted applications as I was leaving, as I was sort of heading out the door. I needed to do something. I needed a job. I fell back into some literary type work that I had done before I did my PhD. I got offered a job as a history master at a private school in Sussex, which I didn't want to do. And then the pandemic happened, and I had been lurking around on Twitter. Following Bronze Age Pervert in particular. So I sort of was brought to Twitter by Bronze Age Pervert, by Bronze Age Mindset, his self-published book that has caused such a stir. Was recommended to me very early on, actually, after its release by Amazon. I think because I'd been reading Nietzsche, I think that's why it was recommended. But I bought it, even though it looked very strange, and read it and thought it was great, and started following Bronze Age Pervert on Twitter but not really doing anything, just sort of following along in the background. Anyway, at the beginning of the pandemic, now I began this metamorphosis into the Raw Egg Nationalist, an anonymous Twitter poster, posting about health, about fitness, and the relation of health and fitness in particular with politics and the health of the nation. I've got quite a deep background in health and fitness. I was a martial arts instructor in my late teens. I taught kickboxing, I've always been fit. I've always taken care of myself, but I got into lifting weights in a big way, before the pandemic, maybe a year or two before the pandemic. And I was thinking about the politics of health and fitness, and that's actually a big part of Bronze Age Mindset as well. In the book, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff about the relationships between political attitudes and health and fitness, and why it's absurd. There was this thing called the swole left. I don't know if you saw that. There was this funny thing where about sort of 2016, 2017, then these various different outlets were trying to push this idea that actually leftists need to work out. They need to, if they want to bash the fash, then they need to work out, because actually, it doesn't do the left any good for them all to be, like overweight and unhealthy and disabled and all this kind of stuff. And so yes, I was thinking about this stuff, and I was just kind of posting in a humble way. But I wrote a cookbook in the summer of 2020 called Raw Egg Nationalism in Theory and Practice. Cook good with the Raw Egg Nationalist, which I posted first as just a free PDF, and then as a self-published paperback on Amazon. It eventually became a hardback cookbook as well, a coffee table cookbook, and things just started to go crazy from there. And I was in a Tucker Carlson documentary in 2022, The End of Men, with RFK Jr., who is now Secretary of Health and Human Services, one of the most important cabinet positions in the US government. So, yeah, I mean, I think that my posting as Raw Egg Nationalist and writing as Raw Egg Nationalist, because I write for various different outlets, newspapers. I write for the Spectator now. I think that my writing is an extension really of attitudes that I've held for a long time. But I think, especially with the pandemic, then they really kind of crystallized the political facets of health and fitness just can't be denied now. I mean, I think in the past it was much easier to dismiss health and fitness as ephemeral concerns, and why would anybody care? Why would it be a political issue? Testosterone levels, for example. Well, now obviously it's impossible to deny with the pandemic, but also the Make America Healthy Again agenda and all that kind of stuff. I mean, testosterone was actually a political issue during the US election. I mean, it was actually a dividing line between the Democrats and the Republicans. So I think that my writing has proven to be pretty timely. I mean, it's been influential as well, and I mean, I'm followed by JD Vance on Twitter, which I still find very funny, and he periodically gets attacked for that. But yeah, so it's been a strange journey, but I'm pleased to be the Raw Egg Nationalist, and now I'm actually just writing as myself because my identity has been revealed. I'm much happier to be doing what I'm doing than what I was doing at Oxford. I would far rather just be writing about the kind of things that I really want to write about, rather than following a kind of narrow academic career, writing for decades about the Reformation and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, it's been a funny journey, really funny journey.
Charlie, I think it's fair to say that in that response, and if anyone is familiar or is going to go and get familiar with your writings, that you'll see that you exhort people to get back to basics when it comes to food. So you took, obviously, the Raw Egg Nationalist is your moniker. If you speak to anyone who's part of, say, the cultural elite, political elite, whether it's people working in the professional managerial class, there's a lot of talk about sustainable food systems, and that we need to be able to deal with either a growing population, and that we need to be able to feed everyone. Things need to be more equitable. It's all part of a just transition. And there is a lot of focus on processed foods, I suppose. And there are various institutions, but they could be non-governmental organizations, they could be part of supranational institutions, that are all focused on coming up with some kind of a sustainable food system. What's your take on that? And I suppose as a follow-up, why should we care where our food is from and what we eat?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So yeah, I mean, there's a global push really for more sustainable food systems, for more equitable food systems. And actually that's basically the focus of my last book. So I've got a new book coming out. Actually, I think next month it's coming out, called The Last Men, Liberalism and the Death of Masculinity. That's about the political implications of testosterone decline. It's kind of following on actually from the Tucker Carlson documentary that I was in. So it's it's continuing the themes. It's looking at the causes of testosterone decline, but also the political implications, and trying to situate testosterone decline actually within kind of late liberalism, liberal democracy, and particularly Francis Fukuyama's end of history thesis. It's kind of deeply philosophical, actually. I think people will be surprised. It's not it will ruffle a few feathers, I think, and it's interesting. It'll get people thinking. But my previous book before that was called The Eggs Benedict Option, which is a riff on the Benedict option, which was a book written by Rod Dreher 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. 2017, actually, I think that was written. But anyway, so that book is about this idea of a plant-based future, that what we need to do in order to save the planet, not only from climate change, but also from overpopulation, or from massively expanding global population, because the projection is, well, by 2050, there are going to be 10 billion people on the planet. They all need to be fed. They need to be fed healthily. So what do we do? Well, we move away from traditional animal agriculture, and we turn over farmland to arable, to crop raising, and we employ all sorts of new techniques. We use new genetically modified strains of like wheat and soy and legumes and all these kinds of things. And advanced techniques as well, AI and drones and all sorts of stuff like that, and laser weeders and all this kind of stuff to maximize yield, so that we can A, reduce carbon emissions as much as possible, and B, produce enough plant food to feed 10 billion people in an equitable, sustainable manner. So, I mean, this is a big push that is taking place. It's taking place across the globe. It has the backing of the UN, scientific establishment, the medical establishment, NGOs, celebrities and philanthropists, captains of industry, activist groups. I mean, it's like this is massive global push. And my book is basically, an argument against it. It's an argument against a plant-based future for a number of reasons. Health reasons, for a start, because plant-based diets are maladaptive, and I draw very heavily on the work of a pioneering dentist, anthropologist called Weston A. Price. He wrote a book in the 1930s called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which is an amazing book. I actually think it's the best book on nutrition that has ever been written. So Weston Price was a dentist in Canada, and he was Canadian rather, but he was a dentist in the US, in Cleveland, in Ohio, and he was a dentist sort of around about the turn of the 20th century, and he noticed increasingly that his patients, and particularly the children, were coming to him with basically physical degeneration. So it's in the title of the book. He noticed that not only were their mouths full of cavities, but actually their faces weren't developing properly. Their jaws weren't developing properly. The dental arch, the roof of the mouth, wasn't developing properly. The airways and the cheeks and the whole face was almost the structure was collapsing, basically. And so he intuited, he understood, of course, this is something to do with what people are eating. And what was happening at the turn of the 20th century was that actually Americans, really for the first time on a widespread scale, were starting to eat industrially produced foodstuffs, so foods produced in factories, rather than whole foods, locally produced, locally prepared, which is what people have eaten for the entire span of human history up until the 20th century. So there was a profound dietary transformation taking place in the US. It was also taking place in other countries, in Britain and other parts of the industrialized world. But you can think of the kinds of foods that they were starting to eat as processed foods, the first processed foods. So like refined wheat products, canned goods, things like that, sugar syrups, foods produced in factories. The forerunners of the kind of ultra-processed foods that we've been eating since the 50s, and particularly the 1980s and 1990s. And so Weston A. Price was like, okay, I think it's the food. He was a scientifically minded man. So he said, what we need some control groups to compare. So he decided to go on this kind of globe-trotting adventure, visiting traditional societies, small-scale societies, where they ate their traditional diets, where they ate the kind of foods that their ancestors had been eating. So he went to Arctic Canada, and he saw the Inuit, who were eating salmon and caribou and elk and all that kind of stuff. He went to Africa, and he met pastoralists who were consuming their traditional diet of blood, meat, and milk. He went to the Highlands and Islands of Scotland and stayed with crofters. He went to high alpine Switzerland and visited remote communities there where they still basically subsisted on a diet of rye bread, butter, little bit of meat, milk, and alpine trout. Like very simple, very basic diet of whole foods. He went to Africa. He went to Australia and Polynesia, Fiji, New Zealand, South Pacific, Solomon Islands, places like that. And he basically came to the conclusion that, or what he saw basically was that traditional societies, where they still eat their traditional diets, that are based in nutrient-dense animal foods in particular. So that's things like organ meat, fatty cuts of meat, eggs, dairy, seafood, especially in places like New Zealand and the South Pacific. None of these signs of physical degeneration that he saw back in Cleveland among his patients were visible at all. And in fact, so, and he took lots of pictures as well, which is a great part of the book. He has these pictures that show you, what a Western diet does to the structure of a person's face, or what an emerging Western industrialized diet does to a person's face. But what he also saw actually as well in these traditional societies and on the fringes of these traditional societies was the encroachment of, or the infiltration of, Western foods, these canned foods, refined goods. And wherever traditional societies moved away from their ancestral diet towards a Western processed diet, they also started to display exactly the same signs of physical degeneration as the people back in the US. So he established a very, very compelling empirical case that basically the best way to maintain optimum health is to consume an ancestral diet built around nutrient-dense animal foods primarily. So that's a long, explanation of basically my standpoint on diet, which is like an ancestral standpoint on diet. And it's very clear that a plant-based diet is incompatible with what Weston Price calls perfect health. I have a nutritional beef, if you will, with these plant-based diets and this plant-based agenda. But there's also a social and political aspect to it as well. And so in the Eggs Benedict option, then I actually compare the plant-based revolution that's supposed to be taking place, which is often called the Great Reset. It's part of the Great Reset. That's a pretty difficult term, and it conjures up all sorts of kind of conspiracy theories or accusations of conspiracy theories. But there's no doubt that that this kind of plant-based transformation is being planned and is being advocated, and there are policy documents about it, etc. And I look at the policy documents. I'm not just plucking this stuff out of thin air. I'm actually looking at specific, policy documents that have been written and nutritional guidelines, etc. But there's a political and a social element to it as well, and I compare the Great Reset plan for a plant-based diet to the agricultural revolution that took place in the Near East about 10 to 12,000 years ago, and I say, look, that was a profound social and political transformation that was built off the back of a total transformation of the way that food was produced and consumed. So, the agricultural revolution was the move away from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to the first states supported by fixed field farming, basically. So that's like the domestication of wild crops, cereal crops, and also the domestication of a handful of animals, and the emergence of the first urban settlements, these great agglomerations of people in numbers that had never been seen before. So hunter-gatherers would, you'd have a maximum maybe 150 people in a hunter-gatherer group, right? That was about as big as it could get. Well, these first cities in Mesopotamia, then you have 50,000 people. It's a total social and political transformation, and you have states and armies and bureaucracies. And all of that is off the back of the transition to agriculture as we understand it. So I make this kind of provocative comparison, and I say, look, control of the food supply is a political issue. We don't think it is. We've forgotten So there's this great quotation from Ernst Junger, and he says, long periods of peace and stability favor certain optical illusions. And he's talking, I think it's from the Forest Passage, which is one of his books, but he says, he's talking particularly about like the security of the household. And he says, you know, like the security of the household doesn't rest on the state. Fundamentally, it rests on the willingness of the father, the head of the household, to appear on the threshold of his dwelling with his axe, with his sons. Like, you know, like that's the basis of security, is the individual will to defend oneself. Well, another optical illusion that is, I think, favored by periods of peace and stability is this notion that actually it doesn't matter who controls the food supply. The food is just there, you know, food is just there. It doesn't matter who supplies it. Well, actually, it does. It really does. And that's what we're seeing with this plant-based agenda, that actually you're getting corporations controlling the food supply to an ever greater extent. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we eat so much processed food, is because corporations have captured the food supply in a way that, you know, is without any kind of parallel in human history. That's one of the main developments of the 20th century, is corporate capture of the food supply and the replacement of locally produced, simply produced foods with these kind of novel fabrications that require factories and all sorts of novel ingredients, stabilizers, texturizers, preservatives, etc., colorings, you know, to produce. You have to have a factory, and you have to be a corporation to be able to produce these foods. Well, actually, now they're more and more of our diet. You know, I mean, I think toddlers in the UK, aged 2 to 5, get something like 66% of their daily calories from ultra processed food now. So there's been this transfer of ownership of the food supply into the hands of corporations. And that's only going to advance with this plant-based agenda. And I mean, it's quite explicitly set out. You know, in order to feed 10 billion people, all crops need to be genetically modified. Well, corporations own genetically modified cereals and other crops, right? You patent them. I mean, that's why they like them, right? So if you're a farmer and you buy genetically modified seeds from Monsanto or Bayer, who now own Monsanto, you have to sign a contract. And that contract says things like, for example, you can't give the seeds to anybody else. At the end of the year, you have to discard the seeds that you haven't used. You have to come back to Monsanto next year to buy more. There are all sorts of these crazy conditions attached to the use of genetically modified crops, because they are actually patented and owned by the the corporations that manufacture them, unlike normal wheat seed, you know. So it's I mean, it's kind of the Eggs Benedict option is, so it's like a kind of dual kind of rebuttal of this plant-based agenda on nutritional grounds, because it's not good for us, because it's maladaptive, because we should be eating animal-based products, we should be building our diets around animal foods. And also then from the political side, because actually what it means is that we're surrendering basically total control of the food supply to corporations backed by governments. And that's not a good thing. It's made us massively unhealthy through the 20th century, because, you know, we've had all these processed foods foisted on us. And what it will mean essentially is that actually you will not be able to get a hold of animal foods, even if you want to. And so, I mean, you often hear people saying, well, they're going to ban meat, they're going to ban milk, they're going to ban eggs. And I talk about that in the book, and I say, look, I don't actually think that that's what they'll do. I don't think that that's the way that it will work. What I think is that actually you'll see what's happening in the UK at the moment, and this is very interesting with the new inheritance tax laws for farmers. What you're going to see is increasing corporate control of the actual farmland. So, you know, family farms are going to be broken up because farmers can't afford to pay inheritance tax. And so they'll be gobbled up. They won't go to, I mean, the Labour government is saying, look, what will happen is this will break the monopoly of larger farmers, you know, on the market for agricultural land. and it will let young people into the farming business, and they can get a little parcel of land and have a little farm and a family. It's not going to work like that. It's going to be big corporations and asset funds that gobble up all the land, and then instead of having a class of owner farmers, you're going to have a class of renter farmers who are all renting their land from corporations. But what will happen as well is you'll get corporations owning farmland, and then they'll turn it over for different purposes, or they'll just stop using it for animal agriculture. So you're seeing these huge, great solar farms turning up all across the English countryside. Where I live, then you drive through the countryside. Oh, there's another 5 fields full of solar panels that have gone up. And what that will do, of course, is that will create artificial scarcity, and that will drive up the prices, because you've got less farmland being used for animal agriculture, which drives up the prices. And so it's a kind of it's quite insidious. It's quite insidious. I mean, there may very well also be things like carbon taxes as well. That's something that I talk about, and that's something that's been mooted. You put extra taxes on products that are most polluting, that release the most carbon. And so, right, what's that? Well, it's beef. So if you want to have a steak, then you're going to have to pay a surcharge to have a piece of steak. I mean, what they will do is they'll price people out of eating animal foods regularly. So it's a sinister thing, and it doesn't work by any kind of logic of consumer choice. It's not democratic. People have voted already with their pounds and their dollars and their euros. Nobody wants to buy plant-based meat, for example. So you've got these big companies like Beyond and Impossible, billions of dollars behind them, massive propaganda pushes all the time. This is healthier, and it tastes as good as normal animal meat, normal ground beef. People don't believe it. People don't buy the products. Billions of dollars are wasted. The share price collapses. They fire thousands of people, and yet still somehow these companies sort of persist, because they're propped up. Because actually, I think investors are looking forward to a time when there will be explicit government support for them, where there'll be subsidies, perhaps. And it might actually be the case that people just can't afford to eat normal animal products, and so they say, okay, what the hell? I'll have a plant-based beef burger, because I want to have something like a beef burger. So it's a complicated thing. I mean, I make the argument as well in the book that, look, I don't honestly know that you certainly can't make a case that will convince me that I should give up animal products, the products that are necessary for my health, simply because there are going to be 5 billion people in Africa. Like, that's you're going to have to try harder to convince me that that is something that I have to do. But that is, it's just the assumption is, oh, well, there's going to be 10 billion people in the world, so we've all of us in the West, because of course it is us in the West, are going to have to give up animal foods. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't follow for me. So I mean, it's a complicated, it's a book. I mean, it's a 300 odd page book. I mean, it's a kind of, I consider it to be like a distillation of all of and a formulation actually of all of the kind of doctrines of raw egg nationalism, and all of the kind of ideas that I'm trying to promote about the relationship between health and fitness and diet and politics on the other hand. And it's been very successful, actually. It's been very, very well received. It was, it was top of the Amazon chart in its category for almost a year. I mean, it beat off books by like George Monbiot, for example. He had a book called Regenesis that was actually an argument that was the opposite argument. So his argument was, for a plant-based future, and then mine is for the returning to the past. But yeah, I beat his book off, and yeah, it's been a big success.
The points that you were raising there, which are, I suppose, very prevalent depending on which corners of the internet you go looking in, but there's certainly lots of questions raised around conversations being had at the highest levels of government with organizations, big investment funds, and the like, who are all interested in the kind of investments you've talked about with regards to renewable energy farms or the plant-based food revolution. And I can also talk from experience that that is absolutely happening. I've seen big corporations, which I work in and around, pushing the net zero toolkit on school children, which talks about what would happen if we replaced our protein with insects and why that would be a good thing. And you see that repeatedly, actually. I sometimes you walk out of train stations and, you know, when you see those cake stands, I saw as I was walking down the grass market in Edinburgh the other day, at least 2 stands that were selling insect-based cakes. So it's definitely coming. But I think what's quite interesting is, as you mentioned, people aren't actually that interested in shopping in that free from section unless you're, you know, a dyed-in-the-wool, excuse the pun, vegan or vegetarian. I've certainly fallen that trap before, and I'm reformed on both counts and now eat lots of meat and lots of eggs. But I think what's remarkable is that even though people don't want it, is that they don't necessarily put the 2 and 2 together about the investment toward that revolution. And that inheritance tax move on the farmers was definitely cynical, and it's definitely worked, because I've heard those who would probably consider themselves to be political normies who would eat your bangers and mash and the various things and look for the British made, sit there and go absolutely buck wild about the notion that farmers were getting an easy ride on inheritance tax and they should get what's coming to them. So it was a very cynical move, and it certainly worked. Something else you mentioned, Charlie, was growing populations. And I suppose, having grown up in a time where our population has just grown repeatedly, even though, you know, as we know, the white British population aren't really producing. We're having high levels of immigration, and we've generally seen the global population increasing. There seems to be this assumption that for any kind of thriving society, we need a growing population. Do you believe that?
I have complicated views about population growth. So, I mean, I'm going to speak actually at the end of this month at the Natalism conference in Austin, Texas, which is organized by this group called Exit Group that's run by a friend of mine called Kevin Dolan. They're Mormons. You know, they're very, I mean, Mormons have a high birth rate, right? Mormons reproduce, as do a lot of you know, religious minorities in the US, the Amish in particular. I think you occasionally see these very funny kind of population extrapolation graphs where they're like, you know, in 2300, then there will be 400 million Amish in the US and stuff like that. But so anyway, this conference, the Natalism conference, and it's about the problem of falling birth rates in the West. You know, what can we do to arrest the decline without resorting to the politicians' favorite solution, which is, of course, just replacement migration. You know, just ship in millions of people from the third world. And I mean, so I spoke at this conference. There was the first one was last year, and I spoke about endocrine disruptors, these really unpleasant hormone disrupting chemicals that are everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and you know, have various unpleasant fertility reducing effects and negative health effects, from reducing testosterone to causing genital abnormalities and miscarriages and all this kind of stuff. But this time I'm kind of thinking a bit more philosophically about the nature of the problem, because I'm fairly convinced, certainly looking at the example of Hungary, but also looking at historical examples as well, including ancient Rome, that actually you can't just pay people to have children. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't seem to be the case that you can just give people economic incentives to have children. So, you know, Hungary's Viktor Orban is kind of poster child actually for kind of right-wing government, for creative right-wing government in the West. He has, you know, Hungary had a terrible, terrible birth rate, like the lowest, I think, in the EU. And he wanted to do something about that because, you know, the alternative he wanted to do something about that without resorting to mass immigration. He wanted Hungary still to be Hungary. Well, you've got to have children. So what does he do? Well, he gives tax breaks to young people. He says, if you get married and you have X number of children, 2, 3, 4 children, you actually end up not paying any tax. So it's like you can actually, if you have 4 children, as a woman, you don't pay any tax. Interest-free loans for young couples, so they can start a household, buy a house, buy a flat, have somewhere to live. Because that you would think that would be one major kind of disincentive to having a family, not having a stable home, not owning your own property, etc. Well, what's happened? Well, there's been these measures were brought in, I think, in about 2017. The birth rate in Hungary is barely increased. It's increased a tiny amount. And actually, it's impossible to know whether the increase is due to a broader economic recovery after the 2008 financial crisis. So Hungary was very badly hit by the financial crisis, as were a number of other neighboring countries. And they've all seen corresponding increases in the birth rate in recent years. So it actually looks like all it is it's kind of like broader economic recovery. There's no way that you can say that these much touted pronatal measures that Viktor Orban has brought in have actually had any effect whatsoever. And then the comparison is with the Roman Emperor Augustus, first Roman emperor. There was a problem with the birth rate. Native Romans weren't reproducing, and he brought in similar measures. He tried to incentivize people to get married, to have children, and he also tried to disincentivize. So various kind of sort of shame-based methods, to make people feel ashamed of not having children, not getting married, spinsterhood, with all that kind of stuff. So, but that didn't work either. And so my argument, I talk about Bronze Age pervert, about Bronze Age mindset. So there's a very famous, or it's become very famous, this aphorism in Bronze Age mindset. I think it's aphorism number 16, so it's in the first part of the book, where he says, chimp in the state of nature never jerks off. What does this mean? And he talks about the fact that actually it only seems to be in captivity that monkeys end up masturbating. And he's making a parallel. Well, what he's basically saying actually is that we are chimps in a zoo. Human beings are chimps in a zoo. The modern world is basically is a prison, really, and we're in captivity. And he doesn't really go into great detail about that, but I kind of pick that up, and I kind of make some speculations about the nature of modern existence and whether there's kind of like a much deeper spiritual malaise that might explain why people aren't having children. And it's quite open-ended, but basically my conclusion at the end of this speech that I'm going to give is that there is a deep spiritual malaise. There is like a metaphysical malaise, and unless we can find some way to address that, I don't think that for all the good intent in the world, we're not going to get people to have more children, no matter how much money we throw at them. And another example of that is South Korea, of course, where, South Korea is going to disappear within a generation or two. The birth rates are so low. And they're throwing huge amounts of, as much money as they can throw at young people to get them to have children. And it's just not working. And I think if you know anything actually about what life is like in South Korea, it's pretty hellish, actually. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant for various different reasons. Economically, it's very hard, but also there's just a kind of there is a kind of spiritual malaise that's quite obvious there too. So I think fundamentally that actually if we don't want to have to rely on mass immigration to sustain a positive birth rate, and that is what countries like Britain and Germany and countries actually throughout the Western world are doing. In Canada, for example, then they have this insane plan called the Century Initiative that's backed by various politicians, former prime ministers, where they want to get the population of Canada to 100 million by the end of the 21st century, right? The population is 40 million now. and it's all mass immigration. It's just like we are going to import hordes of people from outside the Western world. And yeah, we'll end up with 100 million people in Canada by the end of the century. But there won't actually be any Canadians in Canada anymore. So, I mean, I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult. And so, I think that the case actually needs to be made for population retrenchment. I do. I think that we are going to reach a point where actually, if we don't want to have to rely on mass immigration, if we want to maintain our actual identity, our actual, our countries as they are or as they were, and we can't get people to have enough children. You can't get native people to have enough children, and like I say, it's just not easy. It's just not easy. Then yeah, I think that what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make a case for degrowth, for population decline. And actually, I mean, up until now, then the Japanese have been doing that reasonably well. I mean, Japan is held up as a sort of object example of an aging population decline, etc. But they've actually been quite clever up to now about things, and they've embraced automation and tried to find ways around decreasing population. But now I think actually they've started to open their doors to mass immigration, and they're taking in lots of Indians and Malaysians and things like that. So who knows? But yeah, I mean, I think that the worship of growth at all costs will be the death of the West. Yes, I do. I think that if we can't actually find a way to break our addiction to mass immigration, and we are addicted to mass immigration because it makes the lines on the graph go up, and that's all that matters. GDP, population growth. I mean, why should Britain have a population of 70 million people? I mean, Britain is already overcrowded. I mean, you'll get these retarded conservative commentators, people like that guy Tom Harwood. He'll fly into Britain from wherever, and he'll take a picture out of the plane window, and he'll say, "Oh yeah, country looks full, doesn't it? Because it's open fields." I mean, there's a certain class of person who would happily see the entirety of the British Isles concreted over and turned into housing for immigrants. But yeah, I mean, it's a complicated. I mean, I think it's a complicated problem, and it's not one that can be. There are no easy answers. There are no comfortable answers to this. It's like, we've lived this way now for however long, for a century, maybe more. Where we've worshipped growth. We've worshipped positive growth, and we've actually reached this tipping point, inflection point, whatever you want to call it, where if we continue along that path, we will destroy ourselves, and things will be totally different. And there just isn't an easy solution to it.
Charlie, there's many areas of that service I want to scratch with you, but I know we're pushed for time, and hopefully we'll speak again in the future. So this side of the paywall, I want to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests before giving you a couple of questions from paying subscribers on Substack. That question is, what have you changed your mind on during the course of your life that you thought was an absolute, something that you didn't think was changeable, but then it fell away? And what was it that made you think differently?
God, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I'm not actually sure that I've ever fundamentally changed my mind about something. I don't think So I mean, I'm not a reformed leftist, for example. I mean, being in an academic milieu, I mean, I did social anthropology. I mean, social anthropology is the most retarded leftist discipline you could possibly imagine. I mean, it's like a breeding ground for the most confused leftists imaginable. People who say there's just the craziest kind of stuff. And so I had to exist in that milieu, and I suppose, certain amount of it might have passed into my brain by osmosis, but I wasn't actively welcoming it. But Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I've. That's a question I'd actually need to think about for quite some time. But I mean, I think, like I grew up in a beautiful rural part of England. I mean, conservatism really and reverence for the past and for tradition was just a part of life and was accepted. So I don't think that fundamentally I'm really a different person. I mean, I could say, for example, that 2016 was important. So I was in Oxford doing my DPhil in 2016, and the European Union referendum happened, and then Trump, and that was kind of a wake up for me, really, because I thought, actually, something very strange is going on. There's a real madness in the air, and I need to understand it, and I need to understand why the people who are propagating it revolt me as much as they do. So that was kind of a big thing for me. But I don't know if I've had a kind of like a Damascene moment about anything in particular. I mean, pandemic was important as well, I think, but I probably am a bit of a misanthrope at heart, and I had a fairly low estimation of the man on the street anyway. But I mean, certainly the pandemic, I had family friends saying to my parents that I should be kept under house arrest because I wouldn't take the vaccine. So I mean, that made me realize actually the full extent to which people are complicit in the crimes of tyrannical government. And so, maybe that's the scales really did fall from my eyes during the pandemic. And I really did actually realize that ordinary people can be very dangerous and in ways that actually, maybe I hadn't quite realized before.
It's almost like seeing a real life example of Hannah Arendt's precept, Origins of Totalitarianism, the banality of evil, that it's not just some puppet master overlord pulling everyone's strings, but rather, it's in those banal actions every day and people's responses to it that can actually lead to an aggregate of quite tyrannical things. All right, Charlie, well, that has been magnificent, and you've mentioned that you've got a book coming out next month. Where can people find it?
So it's being published by Passage Publishing. That's if you're on Twitter, if you're in our sphere, so that's this guy Lomez, Jonathan Keeperman. His publishing company says Passage.press. I mean, we're going to publicize it big time. But yeah, that will be out, I think, at the end of next month. Passage.press. The Last Men, Liberalism and the Death of Masculinity. And I'll be coming to the US. Actually, we're going to be doing a book tour, and we're going to have a big event, I think, in London as well at some point over the summer to promote the book. So, it's all systems going. I'm trying to get on Joe Rogan as well.
Oh, great. Well, I have a sneaking suspicion you might be able to break into it based on your current ascendancy, but I'll keep my ear to the street. Charlie, that was fantastic. Wish you all the best with your book launch. Look forward to reading it. It sounds like a very good addition to your body of work. And good luck with getting on with Joe Rogan. That would be quite the coup for him, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Big for him. I'd be doing him a favor, I think.
I think so. He's struggling for listeners. Charlie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Take good care of yourself, and I hope we get to speak again in the future.
Yeah, we really should. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. To keep up to date with all that I am doing, please subscribe to the Thinking Class YouTube channel at Thinking Class and follow me on X at Thinking Classes. Thinking Class seeks to understand the civilizational issues we face and why what our leaders do in response matters. Here, I seek to explore the ideas, values, and culture that made our civilization, those that are unmaking it, and how leaders at our public and private institutions should respond. Engage with me on YouTube or X, or write to me at thinkingclasspod@gmail.com to tell me who you want me to speak to and what topics are important to you. I look forward to seeing you there and for joining me on this journey.